I've been a hospice nurse for many years. I've sat in rooms where the only sound was oxygen moving through a tube. I've watched the clock turn 2:13 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 4:58 a.m. And in those hours, when the world is asleep and the soul feels closer to wherever it's going, people say things they have never said before. Not to their spouses, not to their children, not to their best friends. To me, a nurse, a near stranger, tonight I want to share the strange, deep, and sometimes haunting confessions I've heard from people on their deathbeds, not for shock, but for truth, because what people confess at the end of life reveals how we should be living right now. 1, I wasn't the person they thought I was. This one comes more often than you'd think. I wasn't the person they thought I was. Sometimes it's said with regret, sometimes with relief. I've had men who were pillars of their community whisper that they felt like imposters their entire lives. I've had mothers admit they were overwhelmed and resentful in ways they never dared express. I've had successful business owners confess they felt empty even at the height of their achievements. There is something about approaching death that removes the need to maintain an image. At the end, reputation doesn't matter. Authenticity does. And the strange thing, they don't confess their flaws because they're ashamed. They confess because they're tired of carrying the weight of pretending. Lesson: don't wait until your final days to live honestly. The freedom you think is risky now becomes priceless later. 2, I stayed in places I should have left. This one is quiet, almost fragile. I stayed when I should have left. Toxic marriages, friendships that drained them, jobs that crushed their spirit, homes that never felt safe. They stayed for stability, for appearances, for children, for fear of starting over. One woman once told me, I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, and now I realize I traded decades for comfort. There's no anger in their voice at the end, just clarity. When time is short, you see clearly what you tolerated for too long. Strange how death sharpens vision. If something is breaking you slowly, don't wait for a hospital bed to admit it. 3, I loved someone I never told. This confession carries a different kind of ache. I loved someone, and I never told them. Sometimes it was a childhood friend. Sometimes someone they met before life took different paths. Sometimes someone they lost touch with decades ago. They describe the person in detail. The laugh, the smile, the way they felt in their presence. And then they say, I thought there would be another chance. But life moved. Egos interfered. Distance grew. Silence hardened. And here we are, at the end, still holding a love that was never spoken. This is one of the heaviest confessions, not because of scandal, but because of silence. How many feelings are buried simply because we fear vulnerability? 4, I was too hard on my children. This one breaks me every time. Parents often confess regret about how they raised their children. Not abuse, not cruelty, but pressure. I pushed him too hard. I didn't say I was proud enough. I was strict because I was scared. They thought discipline would create strength. They thought toughness would prepare them for the world. And maybe it did. But at the end, they don't talk about achievements. They talk about warmth, about hugs not given, about softness withheld, about affection that felt awkward. They wonder if their children knew it was love beneath the pressure. And sometimes they ask me, do you think they'll forgive me? Death has a way of turning authority into humility. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid I didn't truly live. This one is profound. Some patients reach a point where fear of death fades, but another fear takes its place. I kept waiting. Waiting for retirement, waiting for the kids to grow up, waiting for money to feel secure, waiting for stress to calm down. They lived responsibly, carefully, logically, but not fully. One man told me, I postponed joy like it was irresponsible. Think about that. Postpone joy, as if happiness was something to earn after exhaustion. At the end, they realize joy was never the reward. It was the point. 6, the strangest confession of all. Now I'm going to share something deeply personal. Something that still gives me chills. Occasionally, not always, someone will say something that feels different. They'll look toward a corner of the room, or toward the doorway, and smile. And they'll say, they're here. Sometimes it's a spouse who passed years ago, a sibling, a parent. I don't argue. I don't correct. I don't analyze. Because in that moment, their fear disappears. Their breathing softens. Their face relaxes in a way that medicine cannot create. And whether you interpret that spiritually, psychologically, or biologically, It brings peace. And peace is what matters. Deathbed confessions are not always about regret. Sometimes they're about reassurance. The final pattern I've noticed. After years of listening, I've noticed something powerful. The people who confess the least are the ones who lived aligned. They say things like, I said what I meant. I loved who I loved. I forgave when I could. I tried. No dramatic secrets, no heavy burdens, just acceptance. Death does not scare people as much as unfinished truth does. As a hospice nurse, I am entrusted with the final chapters of human lives. And if there's one thing these strange and sacred confessions have taught me, it's this. Most suffering at the end is not about dying. It's about silence, pretending, waiting, suppressing, enduring what should have been changed, withholding what should have been expressed. Death doesn't create regret. It reveals it. So here's the question I want you to sit with tonight. If you were awake at 2 a.m. and you knew your time was short, what would you finally admit? And why not admit it now? If this perspective moved you, share it, because these aren't just stories about dying. They are instructions for living. Subscribe if you want more real, unfiltered conversations about what truly matters at the end of life. And in the comments, I want you to write just one word: honest. Because the greatest gift you can give yourself is not waiting until your final breath to be real.